Thank you for coming here. Today we're gonna be talking about a performance problem. Goes by a couple different names. Some of them are up here. I'm gonna talk in a bit about why there are so many names and the difficulty of having a performance problem known by in so many ways. Couple things before we really get started. I'd like to thank some people, Jay and Karen, for dealing with my constantly having to email them with all my ticky-tacky little worries. The trombone faculty at UNT, Tony, Steve, Natalie, and of course, former Jan Kegerice, for really helping me put all this together and letting me bounce a bunch of ideas off them. And my academic mentor, Dr. Chris Chesky, who's the director of the Texas Center for Performing Arts Health. He is alternatively harshly critical and enthusiastically supportive, and without that kind of combination of the two really driving me, I definitely wouldn't be up here on stage or as confident and academic as I somewhat am. So, a little bit about myself, who I am. I'm a doctoral candidate, trombone performance at University of North Texas. I work at the Texas Center for Performing Arts Health in the UNT College of Music. I help run the occupational health course we teach there. It's a freshman level course where we deal with what we consider the primary aspects of health of being a performing artist, music typically, but we kind of gear it towards all occupations really. 2 years ago now, I published the first epidemiologic survey of musculoskeletal health in trombone players. I published that through Medical Problems of Performing Artists. Costs money, but go ahead and email me. I'm allowed to send out PDFs to anyone that wants one, if anyone wants to read that. I've used the data from that to give a couple different lectures on pain in trombone players and relationships between performing arts or performance anxiety and personalities. And I've given a workshop on epidemiological studies and the construction of surveys towards that end. So before I get started, I'm just curious, for no other reason than my own curiosity, is anyone not entirely sure if they are aware about what any of these things are? Is everyone in the room kind of aware of what they are, have had experience with them? No one's a little unsure? Cool. I kind of assumed it would be a room full of people who had dealt with this either directly or through students, but I was just curious. So how I came to this, how this presentation came to be, as this is kind of my doctoral dissertation topic. I'm going to be conducting an epidemiological survey of the symptoms of this problem in wind instrumentalists. I'm going to be writing the document on trombonists specifically. And while I was writing up the introduction section, I just thought this was fascinating material, and I kind of noticed how little is known about it. We're going to kind of talk about the literature and kind of find out just how little is known and how scattered the knowledge was. And I wasn't aware of anyone talking about this either at ITF or at the regular medical conference I attend every summer. So I thought this would be really helpful and beneficial to people like me who had or have it, the symptoms in their playing, and just to have someone getting up on stage and talking about it and really solidifying what we do know, what little we do know about this. And so this is essentially the introduction section to my dissertation with a few changes for this audience and things I wanted to talk about. Yeah, and the handout, it's supplementary to my study. It would really help me out. Go ahead and put down, answer in any way you want. You can turn it into me right after the presentation, or if you want to think about it or you don't want to turn it on in person, go ahead and email me that. It'd be really helpful. It's just helping me when I start constructing the survey, which I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be sending out the link early on this coming fall. So go ahead and fill out that survey when it comes around. Send it to everyone you can think of. It's really going to help me out. Cool. So the aims for today's presentation, we're going to introduce the symptoms for the problem or problems that we're discussing today. We're going to review the relevant literature, suggest some possible classifications for this performance problem. I'm going to announce, well, I kind of just did announce my dissertation, but I'm going to announce some future research and maybe offer some suggestions for people who would also like to research this problem. And somewhere in there, I'm going to kind of discuss epidemiology and a little bit about how we kind of treat and study and think about performance disorders as musicians, but trombone players specifically, and kind of offer, I guess, my thought on how we do that. So, I thought that the simplest way to get us all on the same page about what it is exactly that I'm talking about, the exact set of symptoms, would be to just demonstrate the problem, the symptoms, as I experience them and as they have been experienced by the people I've talked to. So essentially, I'm going to go to play something, and between air going in and air being turned around to be turned into tone, produce a sound, I'm going to kind of lock up or freeze. So the larynx is going to close, the respiratory muscles are going to constrict, it's going to increase thoracic pressure and prevent me from being able to produce tone in time. So. Right? When I had it, it was a little, probably more towards the extreme end of the spectrum of what happened, but that's essentially it. Air goes in, and before it can be turned into tone, larynx closes, respiratory muscles, that's the intercostal muscles of the ribs, and the abdominal muscles, constrict, increasing pressure in the thorax, which builds up behind the larynx. It typically, when I had it, would only happen on first notes. It would cause the first note of a performance to be either delayed. You can hear that kind of repetition, that kind of explosive as where the air is trying to be forced out. When I had it, once I was able to get the air moving, once I actually produced a sound and started playing, I was relatively functional, as functional as I've ever been as a trombone player, right? Once I was able to move it, I was fine, and at Cal State Northridge, I was considered one of the best brass players there, which is, trust me, it's not a brag. I would eventually lock up if I paused long enough. How long that pause was required to make another freeze, another lockup, would depend on the relative difficulty of the entrance and essentially how I was playing that day or that week. If I was, having a bad time lately and I was really worried, even if it was a relatively easy entrance coming up, maybe it could be a couple bars or even a couple beats if it was really, really tricky. But typically it's just the first note of a performance or a phrase, just starting something. Any questions about this so far? Typically. I noticed that the genre really mattered. Big band, when you got the drums going, even if it was a tricky entrance, you just, boom. It was easier than if it's an orchestra, you're playing Brahms and you have to, everything stops. Right? That would really cause problems. So that's essentially the set of symptoms we're going to be talking about here today. Hopefully we're all on the same page about what it was. And like I said, I had this. I developed it when I was at Cal State Northridge for my undergrad. I had it for several years, probably almost 5 years, before I was fortunate enough to come to UNT, North Texas, to study with Jan Kegereis for my master's in trombone performance. Within the first year, within the first 2 semesters, my symptoms had been drastically reduced from pretty severe. I would say I had a severe case based on what I've seen in other people. It went from pretty severe to mild within the first 2 years, completely gone. And now it's not even something that is a problem. I don't consider it. I haven't thought about it. I've had to force myself to remember it, It's not something I would consider myself completely cured. So having experienced it, having been successfully retrained and having heard so many other people not. So I've heard talking with people, I've heard people coming about, I've had it for decades. I've kind of always had it. It's a troubling problem that we don't know much about. So as I started coming towards a dissertation topic, I think it was natural for me to want to start researching this and start getting some answers. And one of the first things I noticed when researching this is this is an incredibly difficult problem to research. There is no formalized name for this. There is no formalized classification. I'm not even 100% comfortable at this point, based on what we know, calling it a disorder. So based on these things, we kind of have to do research by the symptoms. What are the symptoms of the problem we're talking about? And base all the research off that. So the largest body of literature for the symptoms of this performance problem is musical stuttering. The term musical stuttering comes from speech and language pathology. There are 4 single subject case studies, which are essentially the bulk of the peer-reviewed knowledge about this performance problem, right? The entire peer-reviewed knowledge that I've been able to find about this set of symptoms is 4 single subject case studies. They are about trumpet, 1952, and then flute, French horn, and trombone, 88, 92, and 99, the last 3 in the Journal of Fluency Disorders. They are essentially just a person who is a speech stutterer, a person who has speech stuttering, who experiences stutter-like symptoms when they play their instrument. That's essentially what these are. And they relay their experiences to a speech and language pathologist, and they publish their story. In some of them, the pathologist did some translation into their own words. In the trumpet one, the exact story is kind of published. Some of them have various levels of analysis and comparisons to speech stuttering for development and treatment's sake. But all of them are kind of saying, this is like speech stuttering, so it probably is speech. It is a form of stuttering. And they're just simple narratives with various levels of translation analysis. The trombone one, 99, is a Q&A session where the doctor was able to essentially dictate what knowledge, what questions are asked, and thereby what answers are given in a way. So going through this, the 4 peer-reviewed case studies we have dealing with this set of problems, here are the symptoms in each study. You'll notice they're not the same, right? I feel like that's natural when you have such a small population and when the methods of reporting data are so drastically different, with some doctors presenting the exact story, some translating, some asking questions. Does this mean that they experienced different things? Does this mean that the doctors left symptoms out? Speech stuttering doesn't typically have any physiological symptoms associated with it, so maybe the pathologists left out some of the physical symptoms. Who knows? It's not available knowledge. So kind of compiling that list of symptoms between the 4 different studies, here are essentially the categorized symptoms for musical stuttering based on those 4 subjects, those 4 studies. We have difficulty playing first note, be that delayed, explosive, repeated, usually was all 3, some kind of tension in the throat, and then tightness in the chest and respiratory muscles. Again, that's the intercostal muscles and abdominal muscles typically. So these are the symptoms for musical stuttering. There is one more study, an actual study on musical stuttering. It is a dissertation out of Alabama from 2004. Here's the title up here. This is the only true epi study of this set of symptoms. It's about musical stuttering. Using the data from this epi study, it's possible to calculate a lifetime prevalence of 33.3% in a population of 225 mixed brass. That means 33.3%, I think 75 of the 225 mixed brass players reported having experienced musical stuttering at some point in their life. Problem is, I have to say that it's possible to get that prevalence rate because this study is highly flawed. This is a very problematic study. He confuses terminology. He bases conclusions off an unknown number of responses. In some cases, he bases conclusions off a single person's response, which makes the data unreliable. It's hard to say, one person experienced this, so it's likely that this is what happens. When you think about it, it's not reliable. It's inconsistent. It's still a good study and has loads of value. mostly for helping direct future research and things like that. One of the things in the study I thought was very valuable is when he's talking about the physical symptoms experienced by people who reported having musical stuttering. He says that they are similar to the performance disorder Valsalva maneuver. Here it is again in the title, Valsalva maneuver. I'm guessing this is probably the name people in the room are most familiar with, more than musical stuttering at least. This is when I had it. When I had the symptoms, this problem, I remember sitting in my junior one-bedroom in Van Nuys, California. I was in the middle of a practice/throwing things against the wall session, dealing with it. And I started reading Doug Yo's website, as I would do. And I found a little bit of Brad Howland's article on Valsalva maneuver. And this is the first time I'd ever heard a description or ever been aware of a description of what I was experiencing. Up until I saw the words Valsalva maneuver, Arnold Jacobs, and the list of symptoms, I thought I was alone. I thought I was just this freak who wasn't able to make a tone. I was just getting worse and I was alone. I was doing everything. Every teacher I could find was telling me and it wasn't helping. And then I saw that and it just weight off my shoulders, angels from the heaven. I'm not alone. Other people have this problem. So let's talk about how we're all aware of Valsalva maneuver. I can tell you, the term Valsalva maneuver, sorry. I go to medical conferences every year, and when I've been telling the doctors, MDs and OTs, about this performance problem and calling it Valsalva maneuver, I'm met with a lot of strange stares. And that's because Valsalva maneuver is already part of the medical lexicon. This is a terminology in medical dictionaries, right? This has been since 1704 when a guy who, surprise, named Valsalva, first coined the term for this response. It is essentially forced expiratory effort against a closed airway, whether that's here or in the larynx, right? It's increasing the pressure inside the thorax to clear the Eustachian tubes connecting the throat to the ears. It's just an increase in thoracic pressure right here. It's something we've all done. You guys have done it several times a day, this Valsalva maneuver. It's what we do whenever we cough or sneeze or give birth or lift weights or poop. If everyone wants to take a second and try to poop your pants, you'll all experience Valsalva maneuver, right? You guys are doing it. Someone in here is doing it, right? You've done it. You're aware. It's something you may not have been aware of what it is, but you know the feeling. That is Valsalva maneuver. So how did this thing that has been part of the medical lexicon for centuries become the name for a performance disorder, performance problem? Well, you can kind of think Arnold Jacobs, kind of, right? I don't have to tell this audience who Arnold Jacobs is. The first noted use for the word Valsalva maneuver for a performance problem that I was able to find is in a lesson in 1966 between Arnold Jacobs and Richard Erb. From what I could tell in the wording of this, Jacobs noted that Erb was experiencing symptoms similar to the Valsalva maneuver, the thing we were just talking about, when Erb was playing. And in a master class, Jacobs claimed that he's had students galore, quote, who have also had this problem. It's important to note that from the wording I've found in this, that it sounds like Jacobs isn't saying this is Valsalva maneuver. He's saying the thing you're experiencing is similar to the Valsalva maneuver. But as is common with Jacobs, who didn't really publish anything, there was a kind of mistranslation, I believe, over time. And this thing is like Valsalva maneuver kind of became, this thing is Valsalva maneuver, which is essentially an erroneous title, confusing. It'd be hard to talk with doctors using this terminology because you have to explain why, and that's difficult. So musical stuttering, by the way, is also a flawed title because it's only dealing with the audiological, the audible outcome. It's dealing with just the sound, the difficulty playing the first note. It kind of ignores as a title the physical symptoms of this problem. So I don't like either of them, but they're kind of the two main bodies of literature dealing with this set of symptoms. There's no known peer-reviewed literature I've been able to find about a performance disorder called Valsalva maneuver. Valsalva maneuver has been studied in MPPA, but they're just kind of measuring thoracic pressure increases during brass playing. I don't think it's the same thing. It doesn't involve the symptoms. I would say increase in thoracic pressure during playing high on a brass instrument might be typical, might be, or at least is probably somewhat common. Not the same thing, I don't believe. There is no peer-reviewed knowledge about a performance disorder or performance problem called Valsalva maneuver. So going through whatever literature I've been able to find about performance problem called Valsalva maneuver, here is a compilation of the different types of symptoms for that problem. You might notice a similarity. Musical stuttering, right? Same set of symptoms. To add to the chaos, I've also found names in my study for these symptoms of stutter tongue and Valsalva stuttering. Oof. These were aligned this morning, I swear. Stutter tongue has kind of a special place in my heart because the first time I was daring enough to talk about the problem I was having with a person in person was Mike Fellinger, former bass bone for San Diego. And I remember being nervous the whole lesson. I was thinking, like, I need to tell someone about this. And I did. I was like, here's the thing I'm doing. And he just goes, oh, yeah, I know. It's called stutter tongue. He just starts listing people that he knows have had it or continue to have it. And I was shocked. Again, I kind of thought he would be like, you're weird, right? Turns out it's a somewhat common thing, perhaps. So it's likely, based on the knowledge we have, that Valsalva maneuver and musical stuttering is the same problem. They have similar or identical symptoms. It's likely that they are the same problem. However, we don't know yet. The entire body of literature we have about this set of symptoms comes from 4 single-subject case studies, 1 highly flawed epidemiologic survey, and then a handful of anecdotal evidence, expert opinion, not the most reliable sources of information. So we really don't know that much. Real quick, I kind of wanted, it's a bit of an aside, but I thought it was important to bring up, especially when I'm saying that this knowledge isn't good enough, especially when fantastic known players have written things about this problem, right, or similar problems. So how can I stand up here and say it's not good enough? We probably have hundreds of years of teaching experience combined throughout this room, maybe even a few hundred years teaching experience dealing with this problem combined in the experience in this room alone. How is it possible that I am able to stand up here, or I'm willing to stand up here and say that is also not quite good enough? So I think that this is a serious problem. It could have, if I wasn't so stubborn and tenacious and downright stupid, I might have quit playing trombone, not made it to UNT, and probably gotten a job that actually pays money, right? Everyone here has probably might have had a student who has not made it that far. I mean, it's when you really have these symptoms, it is terrifying. When you know you have a performance in that morning, or you have a performance tonight in the morning, you're not really able to start a sound, right? It's awful. It's crushing. This is, I believe, a serious problem that we need to treat seriously. And if we want to start considering this more than just a performance problem, and start considering it perhaps as a medical issue akin to focal dystonia, which I believe is probably the correct direction we should with this, we need to start treating it like a medical issue. We need to start thinking of it as one and studying it like we would a medical issue. So how do you study something like a medical issue? What does that mean? The way medical issues are studied is through epidemiology, right? This is one of the words I had to practice saying. Epidemiology, what is it? Boop. It's the study of a condition in a human population. The more accurate description is disease instead of condition, but it's kind of a scary word, so I went with condition. Essentially, you study population of people to find relationships between whatever it is you're studying and X, right? And we use information about groups of people to study a problem, and using that information and using the experiences of that population, we find clues, relationships between the problem and different sets of things. Then we can use that information, those relationships, to apply it to individuals. And if we're able to help the individuals using that information, then we improve the health of the entire population. That is essentially epidemiology. This is my favorite step-by-step explanation of how to do an epidemiologic study. You start with describing what is the problem, how often does it happen, who does it happen to, implicit in that is who does it not happen to, what is the problem. I like to say that as far as what we know about the symptoms we're talking about here today, we are not able to answer any of these questions, right? We have not yet completed step one of an epidemiologic study about the symptoms we're talking about today. Step two of an epidemiologic survey is, can we explain it? Can we explain why it's happening? Can we explain why it's happening to this group and not this group? From there, predict. Can we predict when it's going to happen, who it's going to happen to, how often it's going to happen based on whatever relationships we find are relevant? And then from predict, control. Can we stop it? Can we prevent it from happening? Treatments and preventions. And from there, hopefully we're able to diminish the cases of a problem and then eventually completely get rid of it. So this is hard, right? This is incredibly time consuming. I would say based on where we are, we would be lucky if we could get to the predict stage of our knowledge about this disorder within a decade, right? Following the scientific process of publishing, replication, adapting, publication, replication, adapting, right? It would be maybe a decade before we knew enough to be able to predict who's likely to get it, right, to get to the control. So why should we bother with this level of scrutiny in our studies? Essentially, bias. Bias has nothing to do with race or stereotyping. Bias is the relative validity of a study's findings, the relative validity of a study's findings. Types of bias include population bias, measuring tool bias, and bias in how the data is reported. It's essentially there is bias in a study if there is another explanation for how you achieve that data. If someone else can give another possible reason for how you achieve the results, then that study is said to have bias. And essentially, bias prevents us from knowing the truth. It's pretty common in studies for people to, rather than try to find what is really happening, to try to affirm their own worldview or affirm their own theories and try to make sure the data kind of reaches that point. And it's not the truth. It's not really helping people. It's essentially just kind of helping yourself. It's important we try to have more relevant, more reliable studies and information, especially when we're dealing with a serious problem that is impacting performance. I thought, I'm going longer than I thought, but this might be fun. Let's see if I can pull this off. I thought it'd be fun to build a biased study based on the suggestions of this room. So let's say we are going to test the influence of a pedagogical technique on a trombone studio over time. So how about someone give me a pedagogical technique for us to test? Good or bad advice? Bad advice might be funnier. Someone just yell something that we are going to test in this made-up study so we can discuss ways of bias. Someone just say something. It really, truly doesn't matter if it's...
Give us an example of what you're looking for.
Scales, eating broccoli in the morning to improve your trombone playing, right? Just something, and we'll try to see how it could be applied to trombone performance.
Breath attacks.
Breath attacks. The effects of breath attacks. What is the age group? I'm guessing we all teach, right? Someone name an age group for a trombone studio. This studio is age group of 20? College. College age trombone group. We're studying the effects of breath attacks over, let's just say, a month, right? So first of all, we're studying college age trombone players. Can that information be applied to all trombone players? No. College age trombone players are not the same as high school, as beginners, as professionals, right? Where they are also matters. Can our college age musicians in California the same as college-age trombone players in New York? No, they're going to be different. So a study that's studying all trombone players, but they only studied an age group, it's already biased because that data is not relevant to an entire trombone population. Breath attacks. Let's say they get better or worse. Let's say they get better. Is there another explanation for how breath attacks could make them people better? Is there another explanation for how a trombone studio could improve besides having done the breath attacks? First of all, is everyone doing the breath attacks the same? Breath attacks, just because the people say they are doing breath attacks, does that necessarily mean they are doing breath attacks? Studying trombone is incredibly difficult because you are almost entirely reliant on the word of the performer. They say, yeah, I did a breath attack. Maybe they didn't. I've had students who claim they're doing breath attacks, and I hear very clear, ta. Is that a breath attack? Yeah, it was, right? It's hard to study trombone for this reason. So they say they did breath attacks and improved. Did they really do breath attacks? Is this information really reliable? So it's based on the difficulty of studying trombone, it's hard to have an unbiased study. Backwards. So here's kind of this little thing I found, stole from Central Michigan University. It is the hierarchy of studies based on levels of bias. And we start at the bottom here are the most biased types of studies, and as we go up, studies become less and less biased. And it's because it's harder, it's more rigorous to try to put together a randomized control study. It's super difficult, takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. But if you can pull off a randomized control, maybe double-blind study, the likelihood that this study contains bias is greatly less than if it's just, here's what I experienced and what I think it means, right? It's easy to just say, here's what I think is the problem based on my students. It's hard and much more relevant and reliable to put together a controlled study and say, here's the information we found. So, can you guys tell I discovered how to do animations on PowerPoint? This slide took me an hour, so we're going to go through it again. An hour on the airplane. And then these arrows, right? So here is the bulk of our understanding about this problem, and really music problems in general, right? Typically, when you read an article about trombone playing, it's going to be down here. It's typically the most biased. It is, here's what happened in my studio and why I think it happened, which, as we know, it's difficult, right? Your studio doesn't mean everybody's studio, doesn't mean every trombone player. What you think happened isn't necessarily what happened. It's difficult to really apply information from anecdotal evidence or expert opinion to everybody as much as you might think it is. One step up, here we have the 4 peer-reviewed studies for, that's musical stuttering, not MS as you think about it. Just one step up. One more step up is the EPI study, Cochrane, the flawed EPI study, my trombone survey, the survey I'm going to be conducting on this for this study. And then right up here it's kind of the least biased form of study. That's not to say that everything below that top, the gold standard up there, randomized controlled, it's not to say everything below doesn't have value. Every bit of information has value. It's just important for us to know relative to the top of the pyramid how much value it has. And I can say a randomized controlled trial about this problem, I don't know how you would do that. I haven't been able to figure it out, but like a cohort study on this problem, ooh, that could have been bad, right? That would be incredibly helpful. It'd still be hard to pull off, studying 10 trombone players over time. It'd be difficult, but that would be a huge step forward in our knowledge about this. So don't let this thing scare you away or make you think that things aren't important. Everything is important, especially with this problem, this set of symptoms, when we know so absolutely little, almost nothing. What's next? Oh, so now that we have a better idea about what is a valid, a more reliable study, and we know just how little we know specifically about the set of symptoms we're talking about, is there any relevant related literature on the one or more of the symptoms that we can look to for help. Talking with Dr. Austin, a vocal science major at UNT, he pointed me towards spasmodic dysphonia as related literature. Spasmodic dysphonia is a form of focal dystonia that affects the voice, larynx specifically. It causes tension in the laryngeal muscles, involuntary tremors of the vocal cords, uncontrolled voice breaks, and it just sounds difficult to speak. It doesn't cause pain, it just makes it difficult to speak. It has a noticeable effort. Essentially the vocal cords, which I think go back to front, I always mix it up, like this. The laryngeal muscles cause it to either stay kind of tremor open or tremor shut, and it makes this kind of tight, broken, choppy voice. And there are similarities, right? The symptoms we're studying affect the larynx. Spasmodic dysphonia is a focal dystonia of the larynx. There is that similarity, but there are plenty of dissimilarities that make me think, well, similar, it's not quite the same thing. What we're experiencing when we play trombone, I do not believe, based on the evidence, is a spasmodic dysphonia or a form of. However, it does get us somewhere very interesting, which is focal dystonia. So there's, in 2013, a panel of about 12 experts on dystonia finally published the results. It took them 3 years of personal meetings and emails and voice conferences and things to discuss a definition for what is dystonia, right? Dystonia is incredibly tricky. Even in medical conferences, there's very rarely, maybe every other year, anything dealing with dystonia. It's hard, especially hand and embouchure. Identifying it alone is difficult. So developing the least ambiguous, most effective definition for what is dystonia took a panel of 12 experts 3 years to develop, right? And here is the definition they developed over those 3 years. Dystonia is a movement disorder characterized by sustained or intermittent muscle contractions causing abnormal, often repetitive movements, postures, or both. Dystonic movements are typically patterned, twisting, and may be tremulous. Dystonia is often initiated or worsened by voluntary action and associated with overflow muscle activation. So, the existing evidence we have for the set of symptoms that we're talking about here is consistent with this definition of dystonia. Again, the existing evidence we have about the set of problems we're talking about here today, that I had, that I'm guessing people in this audience have had or taught, is consistent with this definition for what is a form of dystonia. Whether or not this would be a dystonia of the larynx or the respiratory muscles or both or neither, we still don't know yet. There's still a lot of studying we need to complete to have a better idea about whether or not it is. I believe it is. Based on what I know, based on talking with medical professionals, it seems obvious that or likely that it is, not obvious, but it just takes more study, more relevant, consistent, reliable study to know for sure, so we can go from classifying it into eventually treating and preventing it. So conclusions, we got a lot of things to answer. You may have noticed I answered exactly nothing up here today. All right, this is an introductory section to a study. Hopefully next year when I come back, I will have at least an answer to provide. We need stronger statistical information and understanding about this disorder to really move forward confidently. We need to stabilize the body of knowledge, which starts with forming a name and classification for this disorder. So all the literature is in one place. You don't have to go to different bodies of literature to find it. If we know what it is, we can put all the knowledge in that one place, and it'll be easier for us to study it and research it. And in general, I believe we need to improve the quality of our knowledge about performance disorders in general. Based on my research, a lot of trombone players kind of base it off personal experience, which, as we discussed earlier, it has value, but is not quite as valuable as it might seem. If we want to treat these performance disorders that negatively impact people's careers, end careers, if we want to start treating them like medical problems, we should start thinking and treating them and studying them as medical problems are treated. So there's a couple things I wanted to end with as little takeaways. I know some people came here hoping I would have answers for this or solutions, and to them I say, sorry, that was never my intention. So I'm sorry for anyone who is disappointed in this. I truly am. It's not me being sarcastic. But there is hope. Anyone that came here with symptoms or with students with symptoms, I was able to be cured, if you want to use that word. It is possible. Hopefully in time we will know what is an effective and is not an effective treatment for this. Maybe next year I will have possible answers, or at least directions for answers. Hopefully other people will have better answers. Let me just say, as someone who had it for almost 5 years, if you're currently in this room having symptoms, mild or severe, don't hide it. I spent years, essentially until I came to UNT and found a safe space, I tried to keep as many people as I knew from ever knowing about my issues. And it just sucked. And once I came to UNT and found an entire studio of people who were willing to accept my problems and understood and had their own problems, and we all talked about it, everything got better. I was able to actually make improvements. It's highly possible that just hiding it was exacerbating it. It's possible. I don't know. And last but not least, this doesn't really relate to much of anything we talked about, but I can tell you, having been to many medical conferences, there are plenty of last year students or people who just started a terminal degree in some kind of medicine, or just got their degree and are looking to branch into performing arts medicine, who are just dying for some kind of research topic. There are loads of people. Go to Performing Arts Medicine Association's website, contact some students, and start setting up some studies. If you have something you want to answer, contact them. Figure out how they'll be dying to do all the work. You just kind of be a consultant, and you can get answers. You can get real, reliable, valid answers on whatever question you have. The fact that we are still arguing buzz or no buzz so heated when there are biomedical students right now who would be dying to set up an experiment on the effects of buzzing or not buzzing on performance or learning. They'll do all the work. You can just set up the study, get an answer, right? It's surprisingly easy. Email some people, contact some people, have some studies done. But then also be okay with being wrong. If you're found that whatever you think is correct, good scientists are okay with being proven wrong. Cool? That's kind of it. Here are my references for this presentation. Thank you. I guess if there are any questions, we got loads of time. Yes?
Understanding that your answer would not be scientific, but merely anecdotal, could you just summarize very briefly how you overcame the issue?
Sure. And just repeating what you said, anecdotal evidence, my experience, I cannot say with any certainty it would work for anyone else. It was primarily not thinking about breathing was my thing. I did breathing exercises for 10 to 20 minutes every day before I played, thinking I just needed better control of the air. And the primary thing I did working with Jan and continuing to work to today is getting as little thought as I can on actual breathing. Again, this is not scientific, this is my experience, but the less I think about taking in and moving of air, the more I concentrate on the sound I want and achieving that sound, the closer I get to producing, having zero difficulty. That was essentially it, getting rid of any kind of thought about breathing. If you want to look into Gabriel Wolf, internal versus external focus of attention, they talk about that. There's been some studies on piano players, focus of attention, which is thinking on the result you want versus the production of the result. Primarily, Gabriel Wolf has done sport trials, balancing, jumping, throwing. I'm aware of a study on piano player focusing on the piano fingers versus keys versus sound in the room. And they found that as the sound went from fingers to room, the further away from the person it got, the closer to the desired outcome was achieved. So there has been some research on the validity of thinking not of yourself, your body how to produce the sound, but on the sound you want to achieve. There is evidence for that to back up my experiences. However, you know, it hasn't been studied in any wind musicians that I'm aware of. So that's how I got there. Another question? I didn't do that good. There's got to be some more questions.
No question, but an observation. Mel Phillips, for example, who stutters when he speaks, but not when he sings. There's something going on there that maybe you didn't hear.
Yeah, I mean, stuttering is definitely relative to the task, right? It's common for people to have speech stuttering, but not singing stuttering, right? So it is task specific in a way. Yeah, definitely. One more. Yes?
You mentioned, for example, with playing a jazz band, that's not necessarily an issue because you've got the time going on. And I had a student that had that same thing, no problem with concert band. Just asked him to pick up a horn and play an etude, play a solo, or even a warm-up. Anything by himself, it would be a problem. And I wonder if there's a relationship kind of with maybe performance anxiety set on a more severe level.
I think from my experience, performance anxiety is probably a bigger influencer than the idea of a sense of rhythm or a beat. Because I would definitely, you know, all the things I read from whatever sources were available, some of the advice is set a metronome or listen to a recording, or one of them was to watch a car go by, and when the car reaches a point, like when the car passes the tree, you play an F or you start the etude. And these things, I did all these kind of things in my practice room, or, you know, like I said, my junior one bedroom in Van Nuys, and they didn't work that well, almost not at all. Because when you're sitting alone in your room, what am I really thinking about? Yeah, I'm watching the car or I'm listening to the band, but really I'm thinking about the problem. Is it going to come back? Am I going to have it, right? And so the car comes by and you go, bah, and the car's down the block, right? Versus when you're playing in a jazz band, when you're not thinking about me. You are the more you're listening to the band, I'm hearing the saxes for my entrance, da la 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 la, boom, right? I'm not really thinking about me or my own performance or what to do. I'm more clued in to the ensemble around me. So even listening to a recording alone in a practice room wasn't the same experience as being in an ensemble. Does that make sense? Yeah. So yeah, performance anxiety is, I think, an extremely large contributor to when I had the experience. Anything else? No? Cool. I guess if there are no more questions, I'll be here the rest of the conference. If anyone has anything, email me. Go ahead and turn in your, I guess you can just put them down here if you want, or leave them somewhere, the flyers. Or if you want to email me responses, take a picture or type it up to you guys. This is to help me and in my future EPI survey on this problem. Cool. Thank you, guys.